Have you ever wondered which period in history was the worst to live in? Was it during World War II, or maybe in ancient times where you and your massive family would live in caves and fight prehistoric animals that would dwarf their present day relatives? Let's start with the present day. While the world is definitely not at peace, I would argue that the present is still the best time to live in. Most of us have access to the internet, clean water, food, and a place to call home. But what were the not so fortunate times you could have experienced? Sit back and relax while we explore the worst periods in history you could have lived in. I think it doesn't shock anybody when I say that war is bad. But to live during the worst war on the planet wasn't exactly a walk in the park. I'm, of course, speaking about World War II. Every country in the world was somehow affected by this war, even if they were not fighting in it. But living in Europe during this period was definitely hell. Bombs were dropping, cities were getting flattened, and people were living in fear every day. And either side was horrible. It did not matter if you were a soldier in some trench in Stalingrad or a kid in Berlin. Life was tough either way. Food rations and the fear that you could die at any second due to some unseen bomb or bullet was terrifying. Around 70 to 85 million people died, or about 3% of the world's population at the time. Not the best time to be alive. But let's go back in time a little bit. When you think of medieval times, you probably think of castles, knights, kings, and queens. Who knows, maybe even dragons, if you watch too much Game of Thrones. But an image that always comes to my mind when I think of the medieval times is the plague doctors and their masks, which used to terrify me as a child. But have you ever wondered why they used these masks, or what was their purpose? It was to protect them from a little disease called the Black Plague. This little disease killed around 20 to 50 million people in Europe, Asia, and North Africa. That was about 50% of all people in Europe at that time. There was no vaccine for this disease, not pills you could take to protect yourself. Water was usually contaminated and rats were everywhere. Well, rats are still everywhere, but that's besides the point. The medieval times are far behind us. However, an even harsher period to be born into was during the Great Chinese Famine, which took place between 1959 and 1961. It was caused by a combination of factors, including natural disasters like droughts and floods, but more importantly, the policies of the Chinese government at the time. This famine happened during what was known as the Great Leap Forward, a campaign led by Chairman Mao Zedong to rapidly transform China from an agrarian society into an industrialized one. To do this, the government introduced new farming techniques and collective farms, but many of these methods were not effective. They also forced peasants to hand over large amounts of grain to the state, leaving little for themselves. On top of that, local officials exaggerated grain production numbers to meet government expectations, making it seem like there was more food than there actually was. At the same time, natural disasters like droughts and floods hit large parts of the country, further reducing the amount of food available. With crops failing and poor policy decisions, the situation worsened. Over these years, millions of people starved to death. Estimates of the death toll vary, but some suggest that between 15 to 45 million people died during this famine. Well, that is it for this video. You have seen some of the worst periods to live in history, so looking at the present really doesn't look that bad. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.